You know, there's one thing, and I've said this multiple times, that really ticks me off, and that's censorship. And recently, there has, and by recently I mean the last 5-ish years, there's been a very strong push by people to have things censored in a more caring manner, if you will. Before I explain that, I'm going to do a little bit of history. Censorship is not just government censorship. There exists all kinds of censorship in the world today. The predominant form is by either company censorship or complaint-induced censorship. The latter example, I'm going to read an excerpt from Anne Rice. Yes, the world-acclaimed author, Anne Rice. She put this into more elegant words than I could ever hope to, because I'm a fucking idiot. I'm going to quote this verbatim, and I'm also going to quote a response to a comment that was on this to show what I'm talking about and what is becoming the prevalent form of censorship today. Signing off with thanks to all who participated in our discussions of fiction writing today, I want to leave you with this thought. I think we are facing a new era of censorship in the name of political correctness. There are forces at work in the book world that want to control fiction writing in terms of who has a right to write about what. Some even advocate the out-and-out censorship of older works using words we now deem wholly unacceptable. Some are critical of novels involving rape. Some argue that white novelists have no right to write about people of color, and Christians should not write novels involving Jews or topics involving Jews. I think all this is dangerous. I think we have to stand up for the freedom of fiction writers to write what they want to write, no matter how offensive it might be to someone else. We must stand up for fiction as a place where transgressive behavior and ideas can be explored. We must stand up for freedom in the arts. I think we have to be willing to stand up for the despised. It is always a matter of personal choice whether one buys or reads a book. No one can make you do it, but internet campaigns to destroy authors accused of inappropriate subject matter or attitudes are dangerous to us all. That's my take on it. Ignore what you find offensive, or talk about it in a substantive way, but don't set out to censor it or destroy the career of the offending author. Comments welcome. I will see you tomorrow. The first comment on that was, but you see, the bigger government, the more regulation, the more freedoms we lose. When you are beholden to a person or group, you become its slave. And Anne Rice's response was, what I'm talking about here has absolutely nothing to do with government. It's a censorship imposed by people on the net who stir up lynch mobs to take down authors they target for doing what they think is socially unacceptable. Government is not involved at all. And therein leads me to what I'm going to be talking about from the past. You see, this may seem like a wholly new kind of censorship, and a lot of people will tell you that it is, or that it doesn't even exist at all. That censorship and freedom of speech can only be stopped by the government. So if it's not a government entity that is doing something, it is not censorship. It is not against freedom of speech. They would actually be wrong, historically speaking. I will present 2 pieces of evidence from my own personal background that show this was not the case. First, starting in the 50s and up until the late 80s. It was actually around until 2000s, but it stopped being followed sometime in the 80s. The Comics Code Authority. It was not government-based. It was actually an alternative to government regulation. But these people who ran it were insane in how they felt that comics should only be for kids, should not do any adult themes, should not have any adult content. They held comics back for realistically 20 or 30 years before great authors and great artists started fighting back and pushing the boundaries of what could be done in comics. And then they went away. And relatively speaking, there was no issue with them going away. They were made, as I said, as an alternative to government regulation, because this was the 50s. People were kind of nuts. And then, and this is where my own personal background really shines, in the 1960s, but predominantly 70s, up into the early 90s, you had television parental advisory boards. You want to talk about censorship? Oh my God, watch a cartoon from the 70s. You might find a dozen or so good ones, but holy shit, these people destroyed animation for over a decade. They absolutely crippled it as a medium. Granted, there were studios that helped in this, and there's some studios that couldn't do a damn thing, so they had to do what they could within the means. But if parental advisory boards absolutely destroyed animation for over a decade. And they were not government run. What they did was they complained to the government's big arm in television, the FCC. They used the FCC's existence as a way to strong-arm animation companies to do what they wanted. Because otherwise, these parental advisory boards would go to the FCC, and even if they knew they wouldn't win, they would create years-long, multi-million-dollar legal cases for these companies to have to fight. And they couldn't afford to do that. They had to follow these advisory boards or risk being shut down because of legal fees. That was not government-mandated censorship. That was civilian-mandated censorship. That was company-mandated censorship. These things have existed for a long time. These things probably always will exist. The idea that censorship can only come from the government is completely asinine and shows a lack of knowledge of history on an astounding level. Which brings me to the world that we live in today. I have complained about censorship before, particularly when the Confederate flag was deemed inappropriate. Yes, there was government-level censorship in that, well, censorship in that they took it down from they took the flag down from government buildings. I don't really classify that as censorship, so to speak. You want to have a flag on there, your government building, go ahead, you choose. What I don't give a shit. I honestly don't care in that regard. What I found astounding was the civilian level censorship that was pushed to the point where Dukes of Hazzard is off TV, probably indefinitely, because it had the General Lee had the Confederate flag on it. Someone needs to tell me what the Dukes of Hazzard has to do with either the Civil War or just racism in general. I have not figured this out. And then you have idiots at the corporate level, like the CEO of Apple, who said my favorite phrase of all time, that the Confederate flag was offensive and inappropriate regardless of context. You have civilian level censorship, you have corporate level censorship. That is probably the most egregious recent example I can think of, but there have been a lot, and I mean a lot, of examples in the last few years, and they seem to be, they did seem to be growing in number and popularity, in that people were complaining more and more and trying to get more and more stuff shut down or taken off, etc. Lately, though, I've noticed that the people in the creative fields have been starting to fight back. And this is where I come back to Gamergate again. Do I think that Gamergate is the cause of this? Hell no. Do I think that it will be used as an example of a first time where a large group of people fought back rather than a creator solely by themselves? Probably. Is it a coincidence that it happened, that Gamergate happened around the same time that we're seeing artistic pushback against this level of censorship? Again, probably. I think that there might be some connection somewhere, not to the extent that, oh, Gamergate is the reason that there's a pushback. No, fuck that. I don't think it's that strong. I think that it may be used as an example of it, or it might be like the beginning of a more major pushback. I've seen pushbacks before, not to this level that I'm starting to see now. And I think that Gamergate would be used as an example of something that maybe began it, or maybe happened during it and helped it. I wouldn't say that it's the reason for it. But I am glad, and I am really, really glad to see people in the creative arts starting to push back against this. When the populace feels that because they were offended by something, and it's not even the populace in general, it's generally like a few people who have connections somewhere to someone or something, or a few people who are able to work up a shitstorm, a la Shirtstorm. I think the part that amazes me the most, actually, is that in the past couple of years, but especially the last year, I have actually seen a lot of journalists call for censorship in some way, shape, or form. That something is offensive and should be taken down, or something is inappropriate and shouldn't be done. It leads me to question how you, as a journalist who enjoys freedom of speech, can then call for censorship. You're kind of biting at your own hand there. And I'm glad to see that these people are now starting to be considered hacks and laughingstocks, and people are fighting back against them too. And good on you. Fighting for freedom of speech has always been a difficult thing because, as Anne Rice said, you have to fight for some really bad shit too. Do I like the Confederate flag? No, I don't. I don't give a shit about it. Do I think that a product should be, or that anything affiliated or any way tangentially connected to that product, Dukes of Hazzard as an example, should be completely destroyed because it is the initial thing, the Confederate flag, is now deemed offensive? No! Because, oh yeah, it starts now with the Confederate flag, which is something that most people would agree either that they don't give a damn about, or they think is bad to begin with. But what's to stop it from getting into more and more commonplace things that you wouldn't think would be offensive, things that seem innocent enough, but may, in someone's mind, have an underlying tone of hate that they could twist to get it banned because they just want to. It starts somewhere, and then it leads bigger and bigger and bigger. So you have to fight for the shit that nobody likes. It's not fun. It's not easy. That is, I think, the price that we pay for enjoying freedom of speech, is that we have to continuously fight for it. Or shit like the Confederate flag debacle will keep happening. And it'll be easier and easier and easier because they can just refer back to each and every example of how it was something bad or that someone deemed was bad, and that's why we should get rid of it. And you didn't stop us then, why should you stop us now? So to the creative individuals and the creators of whatever medium they're in, I say kudos to you, thank you, even thank you for starting to fight back against what has become insane levels of civilian-style censorship. I hope that you continue to gather together and continue to push back against this. And this is a call to people that you, just regular Joes and Janes like you and me. We need to push back against this ourselves. We need to join them, whether we agree with these people or not. We need to join internet style, hand in hand, and fight back against this kind of authoritarian censorship control. Because if you don't, if you say, well, it will never affect me, why should I care? Give it time. It will come for you. And then when you ask for help, there will be no one left. That got kind of sappy and dark and stupid all in one shot. It's been Math Machine. Enjoying the sanity that I'm starting to see and praying it continues. Peace out.